Montana Territory, late September 1873. The wind swept dry leaves across the prairie, and the sky hung low and gray, as if it had not seen joy in weeks. Jackson Steller reined in his horse at the edge of the quiet cemetery outside Fort Benton. He had not meant to stop, but something caught the corner of his eye. A woman, sitting still as a stone beside a fresh grave, a bundled newborn nestled in her arms. The baby was sleeping, but she did not move, not even to shield herself from the wind. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching on the dry grass as he approached. She did not look up. Her dress was dusty, her boots worn through at the toe. A single name was carved on the wooden cross in the earth beside her: Thomas Walker, 1849–1873. Jackson took off his hat and held it at his chest. "Ma'am," he said, voice low so he would not startle her, "you do not have to do this alone." She finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry now, as if she had already cried all there was to cry. Her face was pale, freckled, and young, though her expression spoke of someone who had already lived through too much. "I do not have anyone else," she said simply. "He was all I had." Jackson knelt beside her. "What is your name?" "Olive Whitlow," she said. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. "That is my son. His name is Waylen." Jackson looked down at the baby. His tiny fingers were curled into fists, his pink face soft with sleep. "You hungry?" Jackson asked gently. She blinked at him. "There is a boarding house in town," he continued. "Warm food, hot water, I will pay for it. Let me help." "I do not take charity." "It is not charity," Jackson said. "It is kindness." She looked at him for a long time, as if trying to decide whether to believe in kindness anymore. Finally, she nodded just once. Jackson helped her to her feet. She swayed a little, and he steadied her by the elbow. She did not pull away. They walked slowly back to his horse. He led her on foot into Fort Benton, the baby still sleeping peacefully in her arms. The matron at the boarding house raised her brows when she saw them, but Jackson only handed over a few silver coins and asked for a room upstairs, warm food, and fresh cloth for the baby. Olive said nothing, just climbed the stairs with Waylen held close. Jackson waited outside the door until he heard the sounds of water in the basin and the soft creak of the rocking chair inside. He stayed the night in the stable, curled in the hay beside his horse. He had not planned to stay in town. He had work waiting down near Helena come October. But something about the look in that woman's eyes, like she had lost everything but was still standing, held him still. The next morning, Olive came downstairs with Waylen wrapped tight against her chest. Her long auburn hair was brushed now, her dress clean. She looked at Jackson with a steady gaze. "Thank you for last night," she said, "but you can go now. I will figure the rest out." He shook his head. "You are not strong enough to travel on your own, not yet. I have to find work." "There is a ranch 10 miles out," Jackson said. "I worked there last spring. They might take you on for kitchen help. You and the boy can stay in the bunkhouse for now." She hesitated. "I will ride with you," he said, "just to get you there safe." She studied him for a long moment. "Why do you care?" Jackson looked at her, quiet for a breath. "Because I have buried someone too." That was all he said. But it was enough. They left that afternoon, Olive riding in the saddle while Jackson led the horse. He walked beside them, one hand on the reins, the other brushing Waylen's back whenever the baby stirred. By nightfall, they made camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods. Jackson set up the fire and handed her his blanket. She fed the baby and rocked him gently, her profile soft in the firelight. "You said you buried someone," she said after a long silence. "My brother," Jackson replied. 6 years ago. He was shot trying to stop a cattle thief. I was too far off to help. I am sorry," he nodded. "So am I." She tucked Waylen against her chest and her eyes dropped to the fire. I was 17 when I met Thomas, she whispered. We married quick. He was never strong, but he dreamed big. Wanted land, cattle, a house with a red door. She gave a small breath of a laugh. We never made it past the wagon. What happened? Fever. He was gone in 2 days, just me and Waylen left. Jackson watched her quietly. You did not run, he said. You stayed beside him. Even when it hurt. I loved him. I can see that. In the quiet that followed, the wind rustled the trees overhead. Waylen stirred and Olive soothed him with a soft hum. Jackson leaned back against a tree, pulling his hat low. Get some sleep, he said. I will keep watch. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer, then she nodded. All right. Morning came sharp and cold. They reached the ranch by midday. The foreman was skeptical until Olive offered to cook for the crew that night. By supper, she had won every man's favor with a pan of hot cornbread and beef stew that tasted like home. She stayed in the bunkhouse with the baby, and Jackson set up camp nearby. He told himself he would ride on soon, but each morning he found another reason to stay, fixing the fence, helping with the cattle, keeping an eye on her. One night, 3 weeks after they arrived, Jackson found her outside by the well, holding Waylen in one arm, staring up at the stars. You still planning on leaving? She asked without turning. I do not know, he admitted. She glanced over her shoulder. I would not mind if you stayed. He stepped closer, heart thudding slow and steady. I would not mind either. Waylen stirred and she adjusted him gently. I thought I would never feel anything again, not after Thomas. Jackson reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. You do not have to forget him to move forward. Her eyes met his. I know. And then she leaned in. Their lips met, soft and certain, like something long overdue. She pressed her forehead against his after. Will you stay? She whispered. I already have, he said. She laughed then, a real sound, warm and light. He kissed her again, slower this time. She leaned into him and Waylen slept soundly between them. Jackson knew then he had found something he never knew he was looking for, and he was never letting it go. The first frost came with little warning. One morning, the grass outside the bunkhouse sparkled silver beneath the rising sun, and Olive lingered by the window, wrapping Waylen tighter in the quilt Mrs. Ellison from the kitchen had sewn for him. Jackson had taken to sleeping in the barn loft, close enough to help if she needed him, distant enough to give her space. He rose early, always before the others, and saw to the horses before heading to the pasture, where the calves had begun to show signs of lung sickness. The ranch hands respected him, quiet, steady, good with animals, but he didn't say much unless something needed saying. That afternoon, Olive carried a basket of folded shirts from the line, her arms aching from the cold. Jackson met her halfway to the bunkhouse, took the basket without a word, and walked beside her until they reached the steps. You do not need to. Your hands are red, he said. Let me. She watched him set the basket down on the table inside, then glanced toward the small hearth where Waylen lay napping in a pinewood cradle the foreman had offered from storage. I'm not used to help, she said quietly. I know. He turned toward the door, but she caught his sleeve. Will you stay for supper? Jackson looked down at her hand, then nodded once. That night, Olive cooked with what little she had salt pork and beans, a cornmeal cake sweetened with molasses, and they ate side by side at the small table while Waylen gurgled beside them. The baby had started smiling, gummy and wide, whenever Olive hummed. Jackson watched the boy with a quiet fondness he didn't try to name. After the dishes were dried and the fire banked low, Olive sat on the edge of the bed, brushing knots from her hair. You were born in Montana? She asked. Not quite. Came up from Missouri with my folks when I was small. First winter our roof gave in under the snow. My mother kept us warm with a fire she built from the barn door. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She was. He leaned back in the chair, one boot resting over the other. The glow of the coals threw soft shadows across his face. "And your brother?" she asked. "He was older by 4 years. Took the worst job so I could finish the little schooling we had. Taught me how to ride, how to track a stray calf, how to stand still when someone's shouting. You carry him with you still." Jackson nodded. "Every day." The wind rattled the windowpane and Olive rose to check the latch. When she turned back, her eyes lingered on him in a way they hadn't before, not cautious, not uncertain, just thoughtful. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "For me and Waylen, I used to think I needed a plan for everything." "You don't," Jackson said. "You just need a place to start." She looked down at her hands, then stepped closer. "You're the first person who's made me feel like I might get to start over." He stood slowly, unsure what to say. But Olive didn't need words. She reached for his hand, her fingers cool against his. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I just wanted you to know." Waylen stirred, and she crossed the room to lift him gently, pressing her cheek to his head. Jackson watched them in the firelight, the two of them folded together like something whole. "You've got a strong boy," he said finally. "He's going to need someone to teach him how to ride, how to mend a fence, how to build a life that holds steady." Jackson stepped forward, his voice low. "I can do that, if you'll let me." Olive looked up, and the look in her eyes answered for her. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. She crossed the last bit of space between them, and when she leaned into his chest, Waylen nestled between them, Jackson's hand resting firm against the baby's back. They stood like that for a long time, no fear, no rush, just the quiet knowledge of something new being built, slow and sure. Outside, the wind settled. Inside, the warmth held. The ground thawed slow that spring, enough to turn the pasture into a stretch of wet clay. By April, the ranch had taken on a rhythm that suited both of them. Olive rose early with Waylen and tended the small garden patch she'd coaxed near the bunkhouse. Jackson spent daylight hours mending fences blown apart by winter winds or riding out to check on strays the snowfall had scattered. One afternoon, Olive stood at the barn gate, wiping her hands on her apron, watching Jackson ride in from the east field. His shirt clung damp to his back, dust streaking his forearms. Waylen, now crawling and full of noise, sat in a basket beside the goat pen, chewing on an old wooden spoon. "Did you find the black-faced calf?" Olive asked, shading her eyes. "He ran himself into a ditch," Jackson said, dismounting. "Had to haul him out by rope. Near gave me a heart attack when he stopped kicking." She handed him a tin cup filled with well water. He drank, then poured the last of it over his head, water running down his neck. "You ever think about running cattle of your own?" she asked. "Used to," he said. "Thought I'd buy land south of the Yellowstone. Then my brother died and everything I planned scattered like dry seed." She leaned against the fence. "Do you still want it?" "I think I want something quieter now, something that holds." They stood there, the silence stretching warm between them. Olive's eyes drifted to Waylen, who had pulled himself upright on the edge of the basket, babbling toward a hen that pecked the dirt nearby. "He's starting to understand things," she said. "He watches me when I say his name, follows my hands when I stir the pot." Jackson crouched beside the boy. "He's sharp, that one. He's going to need more than just me." Jackson didn't answer right away. He took a small pouch from his pocket and set it beside the child. Waylen grabbed it immediately, gums working the soft leather. "That was my father's," Jackson said. "Used to keep tobacco in it. Figured Waylen could chew on it better than the handle of a spoon." Olive looked at him, quiet. "You always carry it." "I did. Until now." She reached down and touched his hand, her fingers pressing lightly against the calluses. That night, she invited him inside again. The cradle had been moved closer to the hearth, and the walls bore new shelves Jackson had helped build lined with dried herbs, folded muslin, and a small stack of letters from Thomas's family. She kept them there, not hidden, not clutching either. Just present. "I've been thinking," Jackson said once Waylen had dozed off. Olive stirred the fire with the iron poker. There's land west of here, near the bend in the Judith River. I rode out there once. Good soil, water close. No one's claimed it." She set the poker down slowly. "You want a homestead. I want to build something we can grow into, if you want it too." Olive turned to face him. "I've never had a home I chose for myself. You could choose this one." She moved toward him, her feet bare against the wooden floor. "If we go, we'd need to file the claim before summer. I'd have to dry enough food to last us through next winter." "I already drew up the paperwork," he said. "Just needed to know if you'd sign it with me." Her breath caught, not from surprise, but something deeper, something that steadied her spine. "I will." Jackson took her hand, not quick, but with the kind of surety that came from long hours shared in silence, in work, in watching a child grow between them. They sat long into the night, planning in hushed tones. She would bring her soap molds and he would cut timber come August. There'd be a chicken coop, a smokehouse, a front porch with a bench wide enough for three. When the last ember flickered low, Olive stood, brushing her fingers against his jaw. "You should stay tonight." He didn't move at first, only looked at her, eyes soft as dusk. "Are you sure?" "I want you here," she said. "Not just tonight. From now on." Jackson stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, his hand resting over hers where it still pressed against his chest. Outside, the moon hung low and full, casting the prairie in silver. Inside, the cradle rocked gently, and the warmth between them held fast. By late May, the valley near the Judith River had begun to green. The cottonwoods unfurled their leaves and the meadowlarks returned, trilling from fence posts in the early light. Jackson rode out most mornings to mark the lines of their claim, returning at dusk with dust on his boots and a quiet ease in his shoulders. Olive had taken to stitching long after Waylen was asleep, working by lamplight to piece together curtains from salvaged flour sacks. She'd never had a place to hang curtains before. One evening, she stood over a shallow crate of seedlings she'd coaxed from the dirt: onions, a few bush beans, and hardy greens she'd bartered for in town. Jackson crouched beside her, running a calloused thumb over the edge of a sprouting leaf. "Didn't think you'd get anything to grow in that soil," he said. "I soaked the seeds in ash water first," she replied. "It softens the hull. My mother taught me back when we still lived near the Red River." He turned his head slightly. "You haven't talked much about her." "She died when I was 15, Olive said. "Pneumonia. My father remarried by the following spring to a woman who didn't much care for girls with strong opinions. I left not long after." Jackson didn't speak, but his hand found hers, their fingers fitting without thought. "I've never stayed anywhere longer than a season," she added, quieter now. "Not until here. You don't have to keep running. I know." That's the strange part. Later that night, after Waylen had quieted again, Olive stepped onto the porch and found Jackson sanding a beam for the new lean-to. He'd been working by lantern light, the rasp of wood steady and unhurried. "You always work when you can't sleep?" she asked. He set the sandpaper down. "Sometimes I just need my hands to move." She leaned against the post, arms folded lightly. "You've been quieter lately." Jackson stared out toward the trees. "I've been thinking about what it means to raise another man's boy, about doing right by you both. I know what I feel, I just want to be sure I can give it shape." Olive stepped toward him, her voice steady. "You already have." He looked at her then, really looked, and in that moment something settled between them, not sudden, not rushed, but firm as the earth beneath them. "When we finish the house," he said, I want to marry you, no one else. No more waiting. Her eyes didn't waver. Yes. There was no ceremony yet, no minister, no paper. But in the quiet way she reached for his wrist and guided his hand to rest against her heart, in the way he kissed her slow and sure beneath the darkening sky. They both knew it had already begun. The next morning, Jackson rode into Fort Benton to file the final paperwork, and Olive stayed behind with Waylen. She spent the afternoon boiling soap over the cook fire, her hands moving with confidence she hadn't known she'd earned. When Jackson returned, he carried something wrapped in oilcloth. He handed it to her wordlessly. Inside was a worn leather-bound book of sermons and a set of iron measuring spoons, each stamped with a star. I traded a pair of spurs for them, he said. Figured we'd need them when we start storing up for winter. She ran her fingers over the markings, then met his eyes. I've never had anyone think that far ahead for me. I think about it every day. That night, with Waylen tucked between them on a quilt laid out beneath the open sky, Olive rested her head against Jackson's chest. The stars above wheeled slow and sure, and the fire crackled low beside them. "Do you think he'll remember any of this?" she asked, brushing a hand over her son's hair. "Maybe not with words," Jackson said, "but it'll be in him, the steadiness, the quiet, the way you love him." She nodded once, her breath deepening. They didn't speak again that night. There was no need. The land was theirs now, and the life they were building rooted deeper each day, quiet, strong, and full of morning light. The walls of the house rose in early June, pine boards fitted tight against one another, the scent of sap still fresh on the grain. Olive had sewn a strip of muslin to bind Waylen to her back as she carried water from the creek, while Jackson worked the frame into place. The baby's weight warmed her spine, and now and then he'd tug a strand of her hair or coo softly, soothed by the rhythm of her steps. Jackson hadn't spoken much while hammering the roof beams, but Olive noticed the way he paused before each strike, checking angles, gauging the line. He moved with the kind of care that came from wanting something to last. One evening, as she rinsed the day's grit from her arms at the pump, she glanced toward the field beyond the house, where Jackson stood talking to a man on horseback. The stranger's coat was caked with dust, and he leaned too far forward in the saddle, weariness in the slump of his shoulders. Olive dried her hands and walked toward them. "This here's Ezra Lockwood," Jackson said as she approached. "Says he's riding south from Fort Assiniboine, horse through a shoe." Ezra nodded, his voice rough. "Didn't mean to trouble you. Just need a place to rest the night." "You can sleep in the barn," Olive said, her tone even. "There's stew on the stove. We won't let a man go hungry." That night, after Ezra had eaten and gone to settle in the hay, Olive sat by the hearth, mending a tear in one of Jackson's shirts. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You didn't ask anything about him," he said. "I saw the way he looked at Waylen, like a man missing someone." Jackson stepped inside, the boards creaking beneath his weight. "You always read people that quick." "I had to once." She didn't look up. "When you've left towns in the dark and slept with a knife under your bedroll, you learn things." He sat across from her, watching her fingers move in small, practiced motions. "You ever miss the road?" he asked. "No." She tied off the thread. "But sometimes I wake up expecting to hear wagon wheels or a fire crackling too close. It takes a minute to remember I'm not running anymore." Jackson reached across the table, his hand closing over hers, warm and solid. "You don't have to explain it. I want to." She met his gaze then, and something passed between them, quiet but sure. He turned her hand in his palm and pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist, slow and reverent. Olive's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. That night, after they'd banked the fire and checked the doors, they lay beside each other beneath the worn quilt she'd patched with scraps from her old travel dress. Waylen slept soundly in his cradle, the room filled with the soft rhythm of his breathing. "I heard from the foreman," Jackson whispered. "He's heading back to the ranch by the end of the month. Said he'd give us the mare and cart outright as thanks for the work." "That cart's held together with twine and prayer," Olive said, smiling in the dark. "Still rolls." She turned to face him. "What'll we do with it? Take it to town. Pick up nails, coffee, maybe a spool of ribbon if you've a mind." Her voice softened. "And cloth for a dress." Jackson reached out and traced the curve of her shoulder. "Planning to wear it for something?" She nodded against his chest. "For when we stand before the circuit preacher. I want to marry you with a clean hem." He didn't answer right away, just held her tighter. The preacher came through 2 weeks later, a dust-covered man with a kind face and a Bible wrapped in waxed cloth. They stood beneath the cottonwood just west of the house. Olive in a pale blue dress she'd sewn herself, Jackson in his cleanest shirt. Waylen gurgled in Ezra's arms, the traveler having stayed on longer than planned, helping with the last of the house's finishing work. He'd become a quiet fixture since that first night, working for his meals and sleeping in the lean-to he'd built behind the barn. The vows were simple. Jackson spoke his in a low, steady voice, his eyes never leaving hers. Olive's voice trembled once, but held. When it was done, the preacher smiled and patted Jackson's shoulder. "You've built more than a house out here." That night, with the stars laid out above them and Waylen asleep nearby, they danced slow in the field, no music but the wind in the branches. Olive's head rested against Jackson's chest, and his arms circled her waist. "I never pictured this," she murmured. "Neither did I," he said, "but I wouldn't change a thing." They didn't speak again that night, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been answered. Years passed, and the house grew with them. A second room added the following spring, a root cellar dug by hand the summer after. Ezra stayed on, building a cabin of his own along the ridge and helping tend the land when Jackson was laid up with a fever one winter. He never spoke of where he came from, but Olive never asked. Some things, she knew, didn't need naming. Waylen grew tall and lean, quick with animals and steady with tools. He called Jackson Pa by the time he was 4, and no one ever thought to correct him. There were hard seasons, drought, a late frost that took the beans, but always there was laughter around the hearth when the day was done. Olive found peace in the rhythm of it. The planting, the mending, the small joy of a pie cooling on the sill. One evening, as the sun slipped low beyond the hills, Jackson stood with his arm around her waist, watching Waylen chase chickens across the yard. "You remember that first night?" he asked. "By the cemetery. I remember thinking I didn't have anything left to give." He looked at her, eyes shadowed with memory and full of light. "You gave me everything." She leaned into him, her hand resting over his heart. "And you gave me a home." They stood like that until the light faded and the air turned cool. Inside, the house waited warm, lived in, and filled with the sound of a boy's laughter and the slow, enduring love of two people who had built their life from the bare earth up. Nothing was missing. Nothing left undone. The wind softened, the grasses bent, and the stars rose again over a home that would hold.